Hello, everyone. I wanted to do a couple items of review from chapter one, and then I'm also going to speak to a couple things in chapter two that you might see that might be a little bit confusing. So this file that I have open right now, Mo EXPS, Mo Expenses, monthly expenses, you should have worked through in the last chapter. And what I want to do here is just go over a couple things that I think are important to note. So I'm not going to go through and format everything, but I just want to mention a couple things that's good to know from an admin perspective, how you would format something. So whenever you're formatting for commas or dollar signs, you would always add dollar signs to the very top row only. And if there's a total at the bottom, you only add commas in the middle. So I would select these two here and apply my formatting for dollar signs. And in this case, I'm going to take out my zeros because there is no change, no cents there. So I'm going to hit the decrease decimal places twice to get rid of that. The one thing I just want to point out to you right now, as you look at how this is formatted and this is not, notice that whenever you use the accounting format, the dollar sign always appears the furthest to the left in the cell. And there's always a little space, almost like you hit the space bar after the last number, even though we didn't. That's how it appears. So sometimes you're going to see numbers like this, and you might feel like, well, I don't really need to format it. It's a number only in the hundreds, but you always want to format it with something, even commas. So for instance, if I would format this row to be commas, even though I don't need it, they're just in the hundreds, I don't need commas. But note how the numbers again shift to the left a little bit, so making sure everything lines up. So whether a number is in the thousands or the hundreds or the tens, you always want to format it with comma style, even though commas might not be needed. So I'm going to go ahead and select the rest of these, format with comma style, because that's what we need here for these. We don't want to put dollar signs all the way down. We just have dollar signs at the top and at the bottom. Then of course we have totals here. I want to go through a couple different options excuse me, for totals. Number one, you learned how to use the sum function in the last chapter. So yep, we could start with the equal sign type sum, do it that way. We could also click the auto sum button, hit auto sum. It'll assume for us what we want to sum there. The last option that you can also do is it's Alt equal. Alt equal is the shortcut key for auto sum. So if you hit the Alt button and hit equal, you'll find that also does the same thing. So I'm just going to hit enter here, take this out and show you that. So Alt equal does the same thing. So Alt equal is the shortcut key for auto sum. So auto sum, isn't very difficult, and we can click it right there. It doesn't take us but a second. But if you're moving through things and you're just quickly wanting to add, you can use Alt equal. The other thing I wanted to mention is you can also select all the cells that you want to add. And if you select that very bottom cell that's empty and hit Alt equal or hit auto sum, Excel automatically knows what you're trying to do there, so it automatically adds it for you. You could do that with multiple columns. So I could select these to delete it. No, oops, that one too. And then I could select, so if I had multiple columns I needed to add, I could select all of them. In this case, we only have two, but I'll select these two columns again, including the blank cell at the bottom, or if there would be blank cells on the right. Let's say for whatever reason we want to add on the right column as well. I can hit Alt equal here as well, or hit auto sum, and it's automatically going to put in it's going to add those cells. So I could look at that quickly and see it summed these two cells together there. Same thing here at the bottom, it added the whole column. So something to keep in mind, just some little shortcuts that I think can be helpful along the way. I keep doing this wrong. I keep hitting my delete key and that's not working. So anyway, you can see the other quick way I could do this is just hit clear to get rid of that. One more thing I just want to mention when you're using the sum function, and I know that you probably realize this already, the book speaks to it as well. You always want to be careful that you're double checking that it is adding the right stuff. So most of the time it is. Excel's pretty intuitive. It figures out what you're trying to add. But let's say instead of budget up here, we put in the year 2018. And then this column, we're going to put in the year 2019. And now if I try to add this, you're going to see when I use the auto sum, it's going to include the column heading in the total, because it thinks that, Excel doesn't realize that this is a column heading. It thinks it's any other number in the column. So you always want to be super careful. We'd have to go in there and say, nope, we don't want B3. We want to change that to B4. And then when we do that, it's also going to put in this little green arrow here, which is basically telling us that it thinks there's something wrong, that we've omitted specific cells. And we, again, have not, but Excel doesn't realize that we don't need that. So I can tell it to ignore it at this point. Doesn't mean the little red square isn't going to, or triangle isn't going to come back, but it's something to note in that case as well. Okay. The other thing I just wanted to talk about is as you work through chapter 2, you're going to do, you're going to have this formula that you're going to work with that I want to go over with you. So we have here, they're going to have you figure out the actual budget if we have a 10% increase. So in the book, it's going to tell you, put in the formula B3 times B12 to give us the percent increase. And the other thing you're going to learn is how you can copy a formula down the column. So we could hit copy here and we could select and hit paste, or we can grab this little fill handle and drag down the column, and that will copy the formula. In this case, it doesn't appear as though that worked well, and that's because we are trying to copy. If you look at the formula carefully here, we're taking B3 times B12. And if we look here, we have B3 times B13, which is down here. And that's not what we want. We need B3 times B12. We need B4 times B12, B5 times B12. We do not want B12 to change. So what you do for that, and again, the book is explaining this in chapter 2. It speaks to this, hold on, I'm just going to find my spot in the book here quick. Talks about it on page 45. So on page 45, it's going to talk about absolute cell reference. And what an absolute cell reference does is when you add a dollar sign in front of the B and in front of the 12. So you could actually type the dollar sign in yourself, dollar sign in front of B, dollar sign in front of 12, or you can hit the F4 key. And if you hit F4, that'll put the dollar signs in for you. I'm using my laptop right now, so I can't hit F4. So unfortunately, I have to hit put in the dollar signs myself. But you'll notice that if you hit the F4 key, it'll put a dollar sign in front of the B, a dollar sign in front of the 12. If you hit F4 again, it'll put it in front of one, but not the other, and so on. You'll see it kind of rotate through, cycle through if you continue to hit the F4 key. But what the F4 key does is it makes the cell reference absolute. The cell reference being an absolute has nothing to do with dollar signs. It just is telling Excel, when you copy this formula down the column, only keep B12 the same. So we have what are called relative cell references, and we have absolute cell reference. A relative cell reference means when it copies the formula down, it's going to change the cell reference relative to where it's copying it to. So Excel realizes that when it copies it, you don't want it to stay the same, you want it to change. But sometimes, like in this case, there are times where you need it to change, or you need to stay, you need B12 to stay. So that's called an absolute cell reference, and that means when Excel copies it, it will not change it. So now when I click and I hit enter here, I can see that it says B3 times B12, and now when I copy it down the column, B12 will stay. So B3, again, is a relative cell reference. We haven't changed that. So it's going to change to B4 and then to B5, B6, and so on as it changes as you copy it down the column. B12, however, because we made it absolute, is going to stay the same. So as we copy that down the column, it stays B12. So again, the absolute has nothing to do with dollar signs or currency, I should say. It just is it's basically a keyboard shortcut you can use to tell Excel to keep that the same as you copy it down the column. So I wanted to just, again, take a moment just to explain absolute cell references to you so you understand. The book will also talk about a mixed cell reference. Sometimes you'll come up with examples of when you want we need B to stay the same, but we need the row to change, or vice versa. You need the row to stay the same or the column to change. So sometimes you'll have what's called a mixed cell reference as well. That really doesn't happen as much. More often than not, you're going to have just the absolute cell reference. But you'll see the example of this in the chapter. And I just wanted to go over that briefly to help you better understand what that means. So still work through it as you move through the chapter, read it. So hopefully you get a better understanding what absolute cell references can do and how it can help you when you're copying formulas down a column like we were just doing here. As always, let me know if you have any questions.